During the recent Mpox outbreak in South Africa, ratings agency Fitch cautioned investors about possible underreporting of Mpox cases. The agency warned that the outbreak could accelerate, raising the prospect of increased pressure on government finances on the continent. Now, lead expert researcher on credit ratings at the African Peer Review Mechanism, Dr. Misheck Mutize, believes there might be bias on African countries. Now, he joins me now to chat more about this. Good morning, Doctor. Thank you so much for your time.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Firstly, how do you think ratings agencies' biases affect the creditworthiness and economic prospects of African nations?
Well, the fact that the analysts who make those pronouncements
Can I get
are
some
outside
fallback on the
the
floor?
continent.
All right. I'm not sure if the doctor can hear me, but perhaps maybe to hand back over to you, doctor, just to get your sense on how you think that ratings agencies' biases affect the credit worthiness and economic prospects of African nations.
Yes, it starts with the fact that analysts who make those pronouncements are based outside the continent, and their sense of understanding the magnitude of risk from these potential areas of a threat is obviously very cautious, conservative, and pessimistic in nature. Because you see that they operate from a position of not wanting to make an optimistic projection. And in that, their position is that they don't want to give investors an optimistic position so that they are later blamed like what happened in the global financial crisis. So this then cascade to cost the issuers that they rate, because they end up having to pay more because of that cautious stance that they take in giving investor information.
All right. Are there specific examples or instances where ratings agencies have unfairly treated African countries?
Well, I think there are many of them. And, in our conversations with them, they always make reference to the jurisdiction in which they operate from, which is the European Union, where most of their analysts are based. We often point out several instances. Maybe just to give examples is why they don't want to bring their analysts to have offices or operate from Africa. They always give an instance that, or an example that the fact that their analysts are based in the European Union where they have best regulations, it means that their stance of operation is very competent. So in my recent analysis, I pointed out several errors that the rating agencies made. The most recent one is when they issued a rating for Tunisia and Nigeria, which was outside the calendar. And they only had to give justification because of the European regulations. We did pointed out recently the issue of Kenya, where an analyst made a commentary which was not based on any credit opinion, that the bond buyback in that country was going to be treated as a distressed bond buyback, despite knowing that such information is going to trigger panic from the investors that held such bonds. And we did pointed out several instances, even during COVID, when they were downgrading countries not based on the actual fiscal or actual fundamental factors, but rather, the cautious stance that the impact of COVID was going to be more severe than they anticipated, which is actually the case on this monkeypox position that, bringing the perspective that Africa has no capacity to report, the monkeypox cases, and just the stance that they could be much more bigger impact to the extent of impacting the fiscal position of governments, I think in that perspective, the views were much more far-fetched.
Doctor, do you believe that ratings agencies adequately consider the unique economic and political contexts of African countries?
Absolutely not, because there is so much potential that has been underplayed, in Africa. We have been pointing out, even before COVID, why is that economic growth is not translating into better ratings. Actually, the general trend of rating has been on the decline since the advent of ratings. Why is it that there are so many improvements in various sectors of the economy that are not taken into account? And if you converse with the analysts that are responsible, you find that the issues of economic growth are not of very significant value. They normally classify it as fragile growth. In other words, it can easily be eroded. You find the issues of human capital, they classify it as capital that could easily leave the continent anytime also. You look at the issues of minerals, they always raise the angle that these minerals are exported as without so much value added. Whilst there is some bit of merits in their views, but you find that the impact of such views actually offset the potential that could be benefited from looking at these factors as factors of value in the credit rating process. So it's an issue that we have been raising with rating agencies, that you need to consider also the positive side of the values that Africa brings to the table, which is observed by the investors that brings money to Africa despite the cautious views of rating agencies, which is evidenced by the fact that the bonds that are issued by African entities are oversubscribed in all the cases that we have witnessed.
All right. Dr. Mutize, how can ratings agencies improve their assessment and rating processes to ensure fairness and accuracy, especially for African countries?
Well, I think it's a simple thing. The fact that they are interested in doing business in Africa, their first a strategy to come to the party is bring more analysts to be based on the continent. It's quite concerning that instead of investing more in Africa, you find some of them actually closing offices from Africa to move their analysts elsewhere, whilst they are expanding their portfolios at corporate level and sovereign. So that's the first stance of a cooperation that we seek from the international rating agencies, that they should bring their analysts. Their understanding of the context of Africa risk factors would automatically change if their analysts are in those jurisdictions. And I'm glad that some of them do acknowledge, which we could witness by their interest in the business of domestic rating agencies. Like recently, you see Moody's acquired GCR, which was the largest domestic-based rating agency in Africa, which shows the confidence and admission that there is some value that is brought by understanding the context from an African perspective. And there are several others which we always recommend, that they need to do thorough investigation or thorough analysis or research before they issue out commentaries, because of their position in the financial architecture, that investors normally see them as a source of credible information. So before they make such commentaries, which could trigger panics and a knee-jerk response from investors, they need to do a thorough research and be patient before they issue such a statement.
Doctor, how do you think African countries can work together to address and perhaps challenge perceived biases in credit ratings?
Well, I think they are already doing so, because in the African Union, which is the continental body that deals with matters of continental interest more collectively, they've already adopted a position that this issue need to be addressed at various levels. So they've developed a policy framework on how these matters should be addressed. And I'm sure you understand that's where the framework of establishing an Africa Credit Rating Agency also falls under. So there's a lot of research being undertaken, which is the basis for which we challenge some of the actions that the rating agencies do. And the Africa Rating Agency, I think it has gained a lot of momentum now, and there is a lot of interest to support that project, which is going to be independent outside the African Union, but with support from member states, which I think is a very important basis to compare the work of the big three rating agencies and see how much detail the divergence of convergence of opinions will be when the new institution comes to life.